Today is Thursday, December 11th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Erika Kirk responds to Candace Owens' claims. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us your thoughts as well. quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. We're glad you're here with us, getting through the news of the day. Joining me today, CBN's Billy Hallowell. On the focus story, Billy, you had a conversation with Lee Strobel.
Yeah, really interesting new film coming out, The Case for Miracles, based on his book, and we get into some of the amazing miracle stories that he encountered while working on that film.
All right, and looking forward to that coming up in a moment. On the main thing today, what is Netflix showing kids? Well, there's some alarming new data. Billy and Trey break it all down coming up on the main thing. All right, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor for this podcast. We've teamed up with Christian Solidarity International, CSI. They are really an incredible ministry. They are boots on the ground, helping persecuted Christians in some of the toughest regions on the planet. And if you listen to this show, I mean, we've reported dozens and dozens of times, and you've been praying along with us many, many times for persecuted Christians all around the globe. I mean, churches are getting attacked. We saw in Nigeria, we're going to have an update coming up on that later this week, but people being kidnapped out of schools and churches, it's just really horrific what's going on. And CSI is one of the rare ministries actually stepping right into those stories, and they're bringing real help to real people who are suffering for their faith. And of course, one of the things I appreciate most about CSI is that everything they do really flows from a deep conviction that every person they meet is created in the image of God. And so this isn't charity from afar. It's ministry. It's discipleship. It's the body of Christ stepping in where the need is overwhelming. So here's where we come in. Praying, of course, is our first line of defense. But if you want to be the hands and feet of Christ, you want to help these persecuted Christians, we're inviting all of you to stand with us and stand with CSI as they stand in the gap. Pray for persecuted believers first and foremost. We'll keep you informed about what's really happening around the world. And if the Lord puts it on your heart, come along CSI to help rescue, restore, and support our brothers and sisters who need us right now. You can do that by going to csi-usa.org. Again, that's csi-usa.org. Every dollar counts. Give what you can to csi-usa.org. And with that, we're going to go to the news in 90 seconds. A grieving widow is firing back, and she's had enough. Erika Kirk, now leading Turning Point USA, is publicly pushing back against what she calls cruel and baseless conspiracy theories surrounding the murder of her husband, Charlie Kirk. She says the rumors, pushed by some on the right, including Candace Owens, are reopening wounds for her staff, many of whom witnessed the deadly shooting at Utah Valley University. Kirk told Fox News she can handle personal attacks, but watching her team relive the trauma has reached a breaking point. Her staff is planning a full response to Candace Owens' allegations on December 15th, and they even invited her to join, though she's indicated she won't appear. Owens continues to claim the funeral was suspicious, pointing to the Catholic cemetery where Kirk was buried. Erika says the speculation is hurtful, unnecessary, and dragging her team through continuous grief as they prepare to honor Charlie's legacy. And the Federal Reserve lowered its benchmark rate by a quarter point, its third cut in a row, but the vote was unusually divided. 3 officials dissented, the sharpest internal split since 2019. Chair Jerome Powell called it a wait-and-see moment, signaling the Fed is likely pausing now and definitely not looking at hikes. Those are just some of today's top headlines. Check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. And Billy, we've been reporting here and there on some of these claims that have been made. I know you talked to Dr. Frank Turek, who, of course, was there when Charlie was shot, tried to help him after he was shot, rushed him to the hospital where he obviously succumbed to the wounds. But he was the center of some conspiracy theories saying that he signaled the shooter. Utterly ridiculous. And what Candace is doing has drawn scorn from lots of people. And now Erika is finally speaking out about it.
Yeah, this has been a little bit difficult to not say what I really think about all of this, mainly because there's people who are friends who are impacted by it that are personal friends of mine. And so, kind of watching all of it unfold and being kind of disgusted by a lot of it. But because here's the thing, nobody should shut anybody's speech down. That's not what this is about, right? This is about, though, that if you're going to come forward again and again and again with claims that all sorts of different people might purportedly have some kind of involvement, or maybe this happened, or maybe that happened, you have every right to say whatever you want. But at some point, the burden of proof is on you to provide evidence of the things that you're claiming.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really a troubling situation. And, praying for Erika Kirk, especially, but everybody, like you said, the ones that are involved in this, that are having to relive this, as Erika said. And really, she shouldn't be having to deal with this kind of stuff. You're dealing enough with the traumatic, sudden loss of your husband, and now having to deal with this. It's extremely unfortunate, extremely sad. And so hopefully God continues to be with her in the midst of this and give her strength and grace as she tries to navigate that. So definitely our prayers there. And we're going to go to the focus story now. And as we mentioned there at the top, Lee Strobel is on a mission to investigate miracles. He was part of the documentary you recently did, Billy. And this is an area of interest for him as well. So what's the story here?
Yeah, this is interesting. He was in investigating the supernatural miracles, and now he has his own miracle documentary, The Case for Miracles. It hits theaters December 15th through the 18th. And he told CBN News that he believes that this is the perfect time to release a movie about God's supernatural power. Obviously, looking at the Christmas season, right? The biggest miracle of all, Jesus's birth, one of the biggest miracles of all, obviously his death and resurrection being the second. But because so much around December 25th is focused on that, he felt this was the best time to really showcasing this film. Again, it's The Case for Miracles. And he said a lot of people are wondering, what is this really about? What does it really mean when it comes to Christmas? And so he's excited to dig into other stories that show how God still moves today.
Yeah, I mean, and Lee, of course, with his background as an atheist skeptic, and then he went on a quest to try and disprove God, essentially, and then ended up becoming a believer. So he's got a remarkable background. And so it's interesting to see, as we talked about earlier in the week on CBN here, about the different ways that God moves and uses people. And these sorts of miracles and supernatural events are definitely one of those ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think we often, we've seen story after story about this in the Middle East and other places. We often forget that, supernatural things still happen. I think in the West, we're so material that it becomes kind of difficult for us to imagine. And yet what he explores in The Case for Christ kind of digs pretty deep into some stories that are, unexplainable outside of God. And that's what we encountered in our, investigating the supernatural miracles film as well. Just stories that you look at them and you say, okay, if there's no God, then how did this happen, right? How did a tumor disappear? How did all these things unfold?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly gets people thinking. And whenever we see these miracles here, these are obviously great encouragement to Christians, right? But it's also great interest and intrigue for unbelievers. And so from Lee's perspective, he's a believer now. How did going through all this impact his faith?
Yeah, he said that exploring the supernatural deepened and enlarged his faith, and really the realization that God is still moving today. He said, the fact is he's still doing miracles today in ways where we've got solid medical documentation, where we have multiple incredible eyewitnesses with no motive to deceive. He talked about no natural explanation, which is what I was talking about before. And he said, and it takes place in the context of prayer, where we have a number of conditions being met, and it's logical and it's rational to conclude that God has intervened supernaturally. So, his point being, look, we've got documentation on this, and it really just, when you can prove something, it makes your faith, look, faith is faith. You know it, you believe it, you understand it, you feel it from the Lord. But then when you have documentation, it's like, well, now I've got proof that this is real and true.
Yeah, absolutely. And so obviously when you go on a quest like this, you're going to come across some crazy stories. What's the most shocking one that Lee came across?
Yeah, this woman, Barbara, had multiple sclerosis when she was a teenager and started to really deteriorate. He said he reviewed her medical records. She ended up to the point where she was in hospice. She was on her deathbed. She was curled up like a pretzel, rigid. She had a lung that had collapsed. The other lung was only working 50%. She had a tube in her throat. I mean, this was very, very bad. She had lost her eyesight, virtually blind. She could no longer control her bowels. I'm just going through the list because it's crazy. Her legs, I think it had been 7 years since she had walked. And so her legs had atrophied. There was no muscle left for her to walk. Now, what ended up happening was that as she's dying, somebody says, you know what, why don't we call a Christian radio station in Chicago and ask people to pray for Barbara? And so they do that. And they end up getting all these letters from people. And it turns out that 450 people pray for Barbara. They write letters reporting how they had turned to God on her behalf. And so hundreds of people are praying for her. And on Pentecost Sunday, a couple of her friends are in the room and they're reading her some of these letters from the people who were praying for her. And she's still curled up like a pretzel in bed. And she claims that in the corner of the room, she heard the voice of God say, "My child, get up and walk." Now, anybody could claim that, but this woman ends up pulling the tube out of her own throat, apparently, stepping out of bed. Remember, her legs are atrophied. She hasn't walked in 7 years and starts walking. She apparently goes to her church, and there's a church service going on. The pastor's up front, and he's like, does anybody have any announcements? And Barbara walks down the center aisle. Nobody had seen this woman walk in 7 years, and everybody starts erupting and singing Amazing Grace, like this crazy miracle moment. Now, one of her doctors was so dumbfounded by this entire thing. He said, I saw her walking down the corner to my office, and my first thought was, oh, she died, and that's a ghost. Because there was no way this woman could have been up walking. And so that's just one of the stories. And there are other stories like that in the film. Really a medically impossible situation that Lee believes God made true and created a healing.
Yeah, it is incredible seeing stuff like that, and it really causes you to think and to praise and to pray, and it really will cause some reaction. If you have no reaction, then I don't know what's going on inside of you. But any final thoughts on this, Billy?
Look, I mean, after coming out of working on the Miracles Project that we did, which people can go to supernaturalmovie.com if they want to check that out. And we have a follow-up coming, in a few months in March about angels and demons. It really does shift your perspective. When Lee was talking about his faith being deepened, I would say that was the biggest thing for me this year, was just looking at God very differently and realizing that the Bible we read, where these things are happening, that we want to scrutinize stories. We want to be skeptical, but we want to also believe and know that these things can still happen. So anyway, I just think it's important that we understand that, and that has shifted the way I look at all of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good stuff. Appreciate you bringing that one on the podcast today. Make sure you check out that interview, which you can find on the CBN News YouTube channel. And we're going to go to the main thing now. And there is still an alarm, even though there's probably been some fade on the popularity of the LGBT movement. There's still an alarming number of LGBT focused content hitting our screens. And new data from Concerned Women for America showing 41% of children's content on Netflix includes LGBT themes, characters, or ideas, has a lot of people really taking a second look there. Trey and Billy have more on that finding on today's main thing.
Billy, the report from Concerned Women for America, it analyzed 326 series rated TVG, TVY, and TV7, and even 21% of Netflix's content rated TVY, which, by the way, is traditionally geared toward preschoolers, contained LGBTQ themes. So this is clearly a widespread issue across all of Netflix, but especially among all of their children's programming. So what's your take on all of this new data?
I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think parents have made it very, very clear on these issues where they stand. The challenge that we have is that a lot of people put their kids in front of a tablet, a phone, or their TV, and they go and do work. They do the things they have to do because people are busy, and they don't realize maybe that this is what is going on. If these numbers are true and accurate based on what this study is purporting, you have a situation where even if your goal is to say, oh, we're trying to reflect the population, we're trying to to make people feel accepted, 41% is a percentage so high that it goes leaps and bounds beyond what you would even do if you felt that that was the right thing to do to try to balance things out. From a Christian perspective, this is obviously troubling because 4 in 10 of these titles, more than 4 in 10, have this sort of content in them. And so I think we have to kind of pull back and say, what in the world is going on here? And if parents are frustrated about this, making sure they voice that. As you mentioned, this was an issue earlier this year for Netflix. It's repeatedly been an issue. And, I don't know about you, but I don't want to put children in front of something that's going to add to any confusion in their lives, that's going to indoctrinate them in any way towards something that would be negative for them or counter a biblical worldview. So there's a lot here to unpack, but I think from a base level, deeply, deeply concerning numbers.
Well, I mean, even when we're talking about close to a quarter of the content that's traditionally geared toward like preschool age kids, TVY content, this is not like Disney many years ago, even before our lifetimes, really, when you could sit or kind of at the end of our childhood going into us having kids now is you could just at one point sit your kids down to watch a show. And, if it was on Disney, it was probably fine, right? It was probably completely family friendly and would even support a lot of moral truths that as Christians we would agree with. But gone are those days, to your point, Billy. And Penny Nance, the president of CWA, she said the ratings system is actually a huge part of the problem. She said, in her opinion, it just doesn't work and needs to be completely overhauled because right now networks and platforms like Netflix, they're rating themselves. So she described what's happening as insidious because they know what they're doing. They're couching all of this content in these shows, and then they're giving it a TVY rating or a TV7 rating because it is predominantly geared toward kids, and they were able to sneak this kind of stuff in. And I want to talk, Billy, specifically about 2023, because at the time, even Netflix, they acknowledged this as a point of pride. The company said it was a standout year because more than half of all of its new shows featured LGBT characters, and about 60%, so well over half of all of its new kids content at the time featured LGBT themes and characters. So what do you make of the fact that this is not just something that's happening here and there, but it's something that seems like it's not a bug in the system, it is part of the system?
Yeah, this is the danger of isolating yourself in these silos where you only talk to people who believe and think the way that you do. Because when you do that, and Hollywood and media have a history of doing this, they present news and information and entertainment through a lens that is not where the rest of the country is. One of the things I believe that shifted the election in 2020 the way it did was this issue, was parents and people feeling like they couldn't be honest about their concerns over gender ideology, over these sorts of issues being pushed on kids. This was a major, major fault line, I think, for the Democrats. And so you see this then now carrying over to Hollywood, where people are patting themselves on the back saying, look, how accepting we are and how loving we are and how we're including all these things in our shows, not recognizing that the rest of the public is not on board with all of that. And even if the public was on board with all of it, what other explanation would you have after spending decades and decades of having this content be pushed in people's hearts and minds? And so I think we're in a really interesting time right now where companies like Netflix are finding themselves being pushed back upon. People are saying, no, we don't like this. We don't want to see this. We actually don't want this in kids' content. You want to put it in your adult content, go ahead. But there's even people who don't want that, obviously. So I'm speaking from a strictly secular perspective here. From the Christian perspective, the answers are very clear here. And I just can't believe that people who are creating content for the masses, if these numbers are true, would do such a poor job of understanding and reading the audience.
Yeah, 100%. And, as you and I have both said so many times, whether it's on the Quick Start podcast or here on our YouTube channel, so much of this is rooted in a spiritual war. I mean, that's what scripture says. This is spiritual blindness. And I want to read a passage from Isaiah that's actually prophesying of the coming of Jesus. It's Isaiah 42:6-7. It says, I, the Lord, have called you to demonstrate my righteousness. I will take you by the hand and guard you. I will give you to my people Israel as a symbol of my covenant with them, and you will be a light to guide the nations. You will open the eyes of the blind. You will free the captives from prison, releasing those who sit in dark dungeons. And the reason that I brought that passage up, I know it kind of seems like out of left field, but I think it shows that Satan is working as hard as he can to confuse people and to keep them in darkness, to keep them in bondage, and especially to kids. It's like getting them so wrapped up in all of this from an early age. It's like, wow, it's going to take even longer to kind of unravel all of this indoctrination that you referred to at the beginning of our conversation. So I just want to get your final thoughts as we close out this conversation, Billy.
Well, I think this is where Christians need to step up and pray. I think we've done a lot of complaining, and rightfully so, about Hollywood and media and universities and education and all these things. Are we actually praying? Because right now there's a real opportunity where young people are stepping up to the plate, in particular, especially young men, and they're saying, look, we want to know more about faith. We're interested. I mean, there's all sorts of conversations. You just did a great story on Barron Trump and how he may be coming close to faith, according to one pastor. You know, a lot of these young people are stepping up, but what needs to happen is intense prayer and really helping people understand the truth. When you have forced people into a corner by giving them inaccurate information on every front, you can expect nothing more than they're going to believe that inaccurate information. And so coming to faith can transform everything for us, but we need to be praying for people as that is happening, that they would come to an understanding of not just the faith more generally, but the order of how things are meant to be. And that order is often thwarted by this kind of content that we're seeing on Netflix and other places. So there's a lot of prayer and action that has to be really undertaken by Christians and others who have a deep care for these issues.
All right, guys, appreciate that conversation there. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
We've got Psalm 147:3. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. This is something that both emotionally and even physically we see God doing in our lives. He does it in Scripture, and he's still doing it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something God can really only do fully and effectively. So Psalm 147, great verse to marinate on as we wrap up this podcast for today. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. And don't forget to check out our friends and sponsor the Quick Start podcast, Christian Solidarity International, csi-usa.org. God bless. Have a great night.